starting with the obvious. Victoria's coronavirus lockdown is looking more stupid, more wildly over the top by the day. Today, just one new infection reported outside the quarantine hotels. Just one, a single one new infection. A woman that government contact tracers and testers already thought might be infected, a woman they had already safely isolated. So the entire state of Victoria is nevertheless still in a lockdown. From the dusty paddocks of the Wimmera out west to the tiny towns in the Victorian Alps out east, from along the Murray to the north to coastal towns in the south. More than 6 million people all shut in their homes. Hundreds of thousands of businesses shut for the Valentine's Day weekend and until Wednesday at least. The shutdown, Victoria's third. The Victoria's Chamber of Commerce and Industry says this time has cost well over $500 million. And all because of 21 people known so far to be infected, all in Melbourne, all linked, all traced, all in quarantine. Is this not insane? Totally out of proportion. New South Wales doesn't shut down like this with every virus outbreak. It takes a peculiar mindset, an absolutist one, manic, not seeing the whole, it's either black or white, to inflict this much pain for this little gain. Which brings me, of course, to Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews. Here he is today.
I am responsible, ultimately, for everything that goes on in the Victorian government.
And he is. That is the truest thing he said today. He is responsible. I just wish he would take responsibility. Different thing. And that is precisely why Daniel Andrews should go. Now, I know Daniel Andrews is in fact popular in Victoria for being tough, the toughest premier in the country in fighting this virus, which is odd because he's actually the most incompetent premier in the country. The evidence, the data, is indisputable.
You can't argue with this sort of data. You can't argue with science.
No, you cannot argue with this kind of data that I'm about to show you. If Andrews is so good, ask yourself this. If he's so good, why have other states not had this many lockdowns? 3 now in Victoria. Why has no other state had so many deaths as Victoria? 820, or 90% of all coronavirus deaths in this country. Why has Victoria had more than 20,000 infections, but all the rest of Australia put together, fewer than half that? If Daniel Andrews is so good, so tough, why have no other states had the coronavirus escape so often from their quarantine hotels? 2 escapes in Victoria last year cost more than 800 lives. And now the virus has escaped again from 3 hotels. Why has Victoria got a quarantine system so bad that guards last year were mostly untrained, often hired through Gumtree, and some even with religious objections to alcohol-based sanitisers? Why is Victoria, the state that has so little trust in their quarantine hotels, much more distrustful than any other state of their hotels as Daniel Andrews? I mean, even today, after a devastating inquiry last year that was meant to reform Victoria's quarantine hotels, the Premier still has so little faith in them, he bans Australians overseas from flying home, while New South Wales welcomes 3,000 a week. Note that contrast. Can't trust Victoria's quarantine hotels, no one may come. New South Wales, we trust it, 3,000 a week. And why has no other state had a contact tracing system so bad? Why was Victoria's widely panned by experts last year as too primitive, too slow, too reliant on even pen and paper? And what gets me, when you go through the data that you can't argue with right there, what gets me is that no other state has a premier who's so in denial. A man who looks at all this failure and still boasts that he's the best. Just last week, boasting that his quarantine hotels were the best in the country.
I'm very confident that we have a system that is worthy of being copied by others, and it is.
Bingo, days later, whole state in lockdown because of a virus escape from those hotels. What a sick joke. Sick joke, sick joke. Can you believe a word this man now says? I mean, right now, he's blaming everyone but himself for the virus getting out of those hotels again. 17 cases from the latest breakout. After one returned traveller who was infected used his nebuliser for his asthma, a nebuliser which experts know helps spread the virus.
Those machines are not allowed. That was clearly communicated. You're not allowed to have them. You shouldn't be using them. There's an interview where that's clearly communicated. It's happened.
But as you just heard in Peter Credlin's show, that nebuliser man, sick of being blamed, said, hang on, I was twice told in quarantine I could use that ventilator. Here he is today, voice disguised, wondering why no one from the government talked to him to find out the truth.
What really surprises me is the fact that nobody really from the Andrews government has tried to reach out and get my side of this story and understand. And I'd expect with the gold standard that you'd be trying to get facts from every single source, not just your own sources.
Now, but the Daniel Andrews spin. Caught out today, he simply refused to answer questions.
There's some degree of debate about this matter now. The person who provides me with advice has been out and spoken to you at some length, and I don't propose to add to those comments because not because they haven't been canvassed, but because they have been. And I don't propose, and I will not add to the comments that the head of CQV has made. That is my answer, and you're entitled to ask the question as many times as you like. That is my answer. These matters have been canvassed in great detail, and I have nothing to add.
You don't think Victorians deserve to know the answer as to how this latest lockdown actually started, whose fault it was? Their own Premier refuses to say, refuses to get involved. And that's how Andrews gets away with this, you know, A-grade spin to disguise D-grade performance. And then there's the fraud of this whole strategy of being tough. I like tough, but be tough only with what works. I mean, as I've said on this show so often for almost a year, be tough, be much tougher with quarantine hotels, because that's almost the only way the virus gets out into our community. And lately I've been adding, put these quarantine facilities outside Melbourne, put all those city quarantine hotels in all our big cities outside our capital cities, so that a breakout, if it happens, and you've seen Brisbane, you've seen Perth lockdown, now Melbourne, if it happens, it can be contained without having to lock down millions of people. Because ask yourself this, would you put a nuclear power plant in the middle of the CBD? Then why have we got a quarantine hotel there? And another tip for Daniel Andrews, be as tough on contact tracing as New South Wales is. New South Wales manages outbreak just as big as Melbourne's without shutting down Sydney every several months. And here's the thing, I am not as down on the contact tracers as, say, Peter is. Maybe she knows better than me, but I am pretty sure that Victoria's contact tracers can now be trusted at least more than last year under their new boss. Because everything I've heard today from him tells me that it can trace people and it can put them in quarantine and it can do all that without the whole state needing to be locked up. Here is that new boss, Jeroen Weimer, talking today of how his tracers found and quarantined all the people who could have been infected by the latest infected person.
That all these cases I'm going through continue to isolate safely. They're all in their 14 days isolation, and all of these household and social contacts I'm going through are also continuing to isolate even when they return negative tests.
That's all I ask. Sounds to me like the contact tracing system in Victoria now works. Hallelujah. So why is the whole of the state in lockdown? When the only people so far infected have been people from the quarantine hotels, their family and friends who either lived with or dined with them at a family event. And people now in isolation. These are all Melburnians the contact tracers could find and isolate. It seems they can handle this after all, so why this lockdown? It makes no sense. I know it makes Daniel Andrews look tough. That's helped him so much in the polls, but his kind of toughness simply hurts. Look at the data, not the spin. Daniel Andrews is far and away Australia's worst premier in dealing with this virus. He should go.